The Council's illusion of power. The grand chamber of the Galactic Council was a sight to behold. Its soaring arches stretched up into the heavens, a testament to the age-old power structures that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. The floor was smooth, polished obsidian, reflecting the shimmering glow of the stars outside. Above, the crystal dome captured the light of our twin suns, casting a soft golden hue over the room. Yet beneath the elegance of the architecture, an undercurrent of tension pulsed through the chamber. I stood at the back of the gallery, silently observing the procession of the Council's representatives, each species clad in their ceremonial robes. They were the rulers of the galaxy, the architects of diplomacy, the self-proclaimed gatekeepers of order. But in their eyes, I saw something more, something they thought they could hide from the rest of the galaxy. Fear. The session had been called in response to a crisis, a growing instability in the galactic community. Species that had once seemed impervious to change were now beginning to crack under the weight of their own hubris. The unified front of the Council was crumbling, and they knew it. But instead of addressing the underlying issues, such as their centuries-old imbalances of power, they were here to discuss their own survival, the survival of their control. I couldn't help but scoff at the irony. These beings, these so-called wise leaders of the galaxy, had never understood humanity. They had never understood what we were capable of. For centuries, we had been underestimated. Our strength, our potential, our power had always been downplayed, dismissed as insignificant. But now, as the lights of our fleet burned bright across the stars, the truth was becoming inescapable. Humanity was no longer the weak, silent observer. Humanity had found its strength, and we were ready to show the galaxy exactly what that meant. The members of the Council continued their elaborate gestures, speaking in tongues that echoed through the chamber, their multiple appendages swaying in exaggerated movements. The sight was as theatrical as it was absurd. There they were, these ancient species, clutching their illusions of power, believing that their political games could somehow save them from the inevitable. But what they failed to see, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that their power was an illusion, a fragile house of cards that could be toppled with a single, well-timed move. I watched as the Council President, a large gelatinous being with a translucent exoskeleton, took his place at the front of the chamber. His body pulsed with bioluminescence, a display of authority that felt almost too deliberate. As he raised his many arms, signaling for the session to begin, the room fell silent, the tension thickening in the air. "Let us discuss the rising threats in our midst," he began, his voice vibrating with the weight of centuries of command. "The instability we have seen among the lesser species must be addressed. And what of the recent reports from the outer colonies? It is clear that we are at a precipice, and I fear that the unity we have fought so hard to maintain is beginning to unravel." His words were met with murmurs of agreement, but it was a hollow agreement. The fear in their eyes betrayed them. They knew that whatever they said in this chamber would no longer matter. The days of their unchallenged rule were over. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing as I studied the faces of the Council. Their species, whether they were insectoid, reptilian, or energy-based, wore the same expression: concern, anxiety, and most telling of all, confusion. They had not anticipated this. They had not seen humanity as a true threat. They thought us too small, too divided, too preoccupied with our own internal struggles to ever rise to the level they had achieved. And now, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The Galactic Council had always prided itself on its ability to maintain balance. The strongest species held sway. The most influential dictated the terms of trade and diplomacy. But this was a delicate balance, one held together not by any true unity, but by the submission of weaker species to the will of the powerful. Humanity, despite our growing influence, had never truly been invited into their circles of power. We had been kept at arm's length, regarded as little more than a nuisance to be tolerated. But now, everything was about to change. As I watched the Council members speak, their words growing more frantic, their voices tinged with desperation. I couldn't help but remember the countless times humanity had been forced to watch from the sidelines. The times we had been excluded from the great decisions that shaped the future of the galaxy. The times we had been overlooked, dismissed as nothing more than a passing curiosity. Yet every time they underestimated us, we had only grown stronger. Behind the scenes, humanity had been preparing. We had quietly developed technologies that the galaxy could never have anticipated. Weapons, sure, but also systems of communication, strategies of diplomacy, and methods of warfare that drew upon our greatest strengths: unity, adaptability, and innovation. We were not like the other species who relied solely on brute strength or ancient traditions. We could think, we could learn, and most importantly, we could evolve. I saw it now, the first flicker of realization in the eyes of the council members. The subtle shift in the air, the moment when they finally understood. The game was over. The tension in the room reached its peak as the council president finally addressed the issue that had brought us all together. The time has come for us to discuss the role of humanity in this galaxy. We cannot ignore their growing influence, but we must ensure that they do not disrupt the delicate balance we have established. His words were deliberate, but there was a crack in his voice. He knew that the balance had already been disrupted. Humanity had already made its move, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The rest of the session unfolded in a blur of disjointed arguments and half-hearted pleas for unity. But none of it mattered. The day of reckoning was upon us, and the galaxy was about to see the true power of humanity. An unstoppable force forged in the fires of adversity, a force that would no longer be denied. As I left the council chamber, I couldn't help but smile to myself. The time had come. Humanity was no longer just a player in the galaxy. We were the game changers, and every species in the galaxy would soon remember the day humanity finally showed its true power. The awakening of humanity's potential. The day of the emergency council session marked the beginning of something far greater than any of us could have anticipated. The echoes of the decision made in that chamber reverberated throughout the galaxy, signaling the awakening of humanity's untapped potential. For centuries, we had watched from the sidelines as the galaxy's most powerful species played their games of dominance and subjugation. But what they failed to see, what no one truly understood, was that humanity was not built on the same foundation as the rest of the galaxy's powers. We were not shackled by tradition, nor were we bound by ancient pacts of power. We were, and always had been, a species that adapted, evolved, and above all, learned from the mistakes of others. It started small, at first. It wasn't a grand declaration or a single decisive act. It was a shift in mentality, a realization that humanity, once relegated to the shadows, had the power to shape its own future. It was the culmination of centuries of scientific discovery, technological innovation, and philosophical evolution. The pieces had always been in place, quietly and patiently assembling themselves. But now, it was time for humanity to take its place among the stars, not as an observer, not as an ally in the margins, but as a leader, capable of influencing the very course of galactic history. The first sign of this awakening came in the form of a message, a cryptic transmission that no one outside of Earth understood. It was encoded with layers of complexity, yet simple in its essence. The message was not a call to arms, but a call to action, to recognize humanity's true capabilities. It was a subtle signal, transmitted across the vast reaches of space, designed to reach the ears of the most powerful species in the galaxy. It did not shout. It did not demand attention. Instead, it invited those who were willing to listen to understand. To those who knew what to look for, it was a message of empowerment, a recognition that humanity was now in possession of something far greater than raw military might or technological advancements. We were now capable of reshaping the fabric of galactic politics itself. As the transmission echoed across the stars, the Council took notice, and while the initial reaction was one of disbelief, it quickly turned to unease. They began to realize that humanity had not only been growing in strength, but had also been quietly learning the intricacies of their political games. For all their grand strategies, for all their centuries of dominance, they had never anticipated a species like humanity, one that could adapt so quickly, one that was willing to break the rules in order to create a new future. But the awakening of humanity's potential was not just about military power or even diplomacy. It was about something far more fundamental, a shift in how we viewed ourselves and how we saw our place in the universe. For centuries, humanity had been defined by conflict, by wars fought on Earth, by struggles for power and control over limited resources. But those struggles had taught us something invaluable: the importance of unity, the importance of working together for the greater good. We had learned from our past mistakes, and in doing so, we had unlocked the true potential of our species. It was this shift in perspective that allowed us to make our move. In the days following the Council's session, humanity began to implement the first of many steps in what would become our strategic rise to power. We had long since realized that the path to dominance would not be paved by brute force alone. Our true strength lay in our ability to collaborate, to innovate, and to inspire others to join us in our vision for the future. We would build alliances, not through coercion, but through shared ideals and common goals. This was not a struggle for supremacy. It was a struggle for the future of the galaxy itself. Across the galaxy, humanity began to make its presence felt. It was not with overwhelming military force or flashy displays of power, but through subtle moves and careful planning. The galactic economy, once controlled by a few powerful species, began to shift. Trade routes that had been closed to humanity for centuries were suddenly opened, as human technology, once considered primitive, began to rival that of the most advanced species. It was a quiet revolution, one that would soon be felt on every corner of the galaxy. But even as humanity began to grow in influence, we knew that the true test was yet to come. The Council, despite its fractured state, was not yet ready to concede to our rise. There would be resistance, there would be attempts to undermine us. But humanity was no longer a species to be ignored or belittled. We were now a force to be reckoned with, and we would not be deterred by the actions of those who saw us as a threat. It was during this time that the first true demonstration of humanity's power occurred, one that would forever change the trajectory of our future. It wasn't a battle fought with weapons, nor was it a political maneuver designed to weaken our enemies. Instead, it was a gesture of unity, a moment when humanity showed the galaxy what it meant to work together for the greater good. It happened during the Galactic Summit, a gathering of the most influential species in the galaxy. The summit was supposed to be a display of strength, a demonstration of the existing power structures, and an opportunity for the Council to assert its control. But when humanity arrived at the summit, something was different. We had not come to fight for dominance or to secure a larger piece of the galaxy's resources. We had come with a new vision, a vision of cooperation, of shared prosperity, and of a galaxy that could rise above its past mistakes. At first, the other species were skeptical. They had seen us as nothing more than a footnote in their centuries-old game. But as humanity presented its ideas that focused on mutual growth, on technological exchange, and on peaceful coexistence, the other species began to take notice. And slowly they began to realize that humanity's true strength lay not in what we could take, but in what we could offer. For the first time in galactic history, humanity became the broker of peace. We were no longer the weak, silent observer. We were the catalyst for change, the force that would reshape the galaxy from the inside out. And in that moment, the galaxy saw the truth. Humanity's true power was not in our weapons, our fleets, or our technologies. It was in our ability to bring species together, to create something greater than the sum of its parts. It was in our ability to inspire hope where there had once been despair, to create unity where there had once been division. And in that moment, every species in the galaxy would remember the day humanity showed its true power. The day of reckoning. The moment had finally arrived. After centuries of political maneuvering, backroom deals, and shadowy alliances, the galaxy was about to witness the power of humanity. It was not the kind of power they had expected. An explosion of force, a sudden strike against their established order. No, humanity's reckoning was far more subtle, far more sophisticated. And it was this quiet, almost invisible power that would shake the very foundation of the galactic hierarchy. The time for subtlety was over. Humanity's moment had come, and the galaxy would have no choice but to watch as the balance of power shifted irreparably. The Council had failed to recognize the threat growing from within its ranks. They had seen humanity as nothing more than an upstart, a species with ideas and innovations, but with no real means of imposing them. They believed our power to be fleeting, that the rising tide of humanity would eventually crash against the immovable walls of galactic politics. But they were wrong. And now they were about to learn just how wrong they had been. I stood in the heart of the human delegation ship, overlooking the vastness of the galaxy beyond. The sleek, polished hull of our ship reflected the distant stars as it made its way toward the heart of the Galactic Council's headquarters, a massive structure that had long stood as a symbol of the old ways. It was a place of tradition, of power, of ancient treaties that governed the known universe. But today, as we approached, that symbol would be shattered. And with it, the illusion of the old order. Inside the Council's citadel, everything was prepared for the final meeting. Tension filled the air, thick enough to be cut with a knife. Every member of the Council had gathered to discuss humanity's role in the future of the galaxy. At the heart of their deliberations was one question. How could they control the sudden surge of human influence? How could they rein in a species that had shown itself capable of reshaping the very nature of galactic diplomacy? What they failed to realize was that humanity was not interested in control. We were not here to dominate or subjugate. We were here to offer a new way, a new future for the galaxy that included everyone, where the voices of all species would be heard, and no one would be left behind. But this vision was not something they were prepared for. And as the debate raged on in their chambers, a quiet storm began to form. On the outside, the Galactic Council appeared as strong as ever, but the cracks in the foundation were becoming more apparent by the hour. The fractures in their unity had become undeniable. Species that had long been rivals, even enemies, were now forced to look to one another for support in the face of humanity's rising power. Their long-standing agreements, built on years of manipulation and coercion, were crumbling. The very nature of galactic politics was being rewritten by humanity's mere presence. Our fleet, once seen as a collection of fragile, untested ships, was now a force to be reckoned with. It was not just our firepower that made us strong, though. It was our ability to think differently. We had learned from the mistakes of other species and developed technologies that didn't just rival the best of them, but surpassed them. Our ships were equipped with innovations that no other species had yet dreamed of. Advanced shielding systems that could withstand the most powerful weapons, stealth technology that made us nearly invisible in the vacuum of space, and communication systems that allowed us to coordinate our efforts with an efficiency that no one had ever seen before. And then there was the most powerful weapon of all, our ability to unite. Humanity was a species that had been torn apart by internal conflict for centuries. We had fought wars on our own planet, torn ourselves apart over petty differences and ideology. But from those conflicts had emerged a unity that no other species in the galaxy could match. We had learned to put aside our differences, to come together for the greater good. And it was this unity, this unbreakable bond between all humans, that gave us our strength. As the council session began, the atmosphere was charged with an undeniable sense of urgency. The leaders of the galaxy's most powerful species gathered around a massive table, their faces tense with apprehension. Among them were the insectoid Zorith, whose vast network of spies and assassins had long been a shadow over galactic politics. The Andromedes, a race of telepathic beings whose power of persuasion had often swayed the council to their side. And the Vrin, a proud and ancient species whose technological prowess had once been unrivaled. Each of them, in their own way, had held a piece of the galaxy's power for eons. But none of them had anticipated humanity. None of them had foreseen the explosive rise of a species that had been underestimated, ignored, and overlooked for so long. As each representative took their seat, it was clear that their attempts to control the situation were futile. They were cornered. Humanity was no longer the underdog. We were the ones in control. The debate started slowly with the council president, an ancient, tentacled being named Herath, speaking in his deep, resonant voice. "We have heard the proposals of the human representatives," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "And yet, I am not convinced that their interests align with those of the galaxy as a whole. Their insistence on reworking the galactic order, on bringing about a new vision of cooperation, is unsettling." A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. The Zoreth, whose multiple eyes blinked rapidly in irritation, shot a glare at the human delegation. "Unsettling," one of them hissed. "Or perhaps it is just the fear of losing our positions of power. What the humans propose is nothing more than a ploy to weaken us and take control." The words hit hard, but they were not entirely wrong. Humanity's rise had begun to weaken the power structures that had held for so long. But what they failed to understand was that our vision was not one of domination. It was a vision of equality, a galaxy where every species had a voice, a role, a future. As the debate continued, a sudden hush fell over the room. The human representative, a young but fiercely determined woman named Captain Elise Takara, stood. With a calm and measured voice, she addressed the council for the first time. "We have not come to take control," she said. "We have come to offer something better. A chance for all of us to build something that lasts, something that will not be built on the bones of the weak. We have learned from the mistakes of our past, and we are here to show you that there is another way, a way forward, together." For a long moment, there was silence. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Then, one by one, the leaders of the council began to speak, first in confusion, then in disbelief. How could a species that had once been so insignificant now stand at the forefront of a galactic revolution? But as they spoke, their words lost their power. Their defenses crumbled. Humanity had, in one simple act, demonstrated its true power. We were no longer the underdog. We were the galaxy's future, the turning tide of power. The moment Captain Elise Takara had spoken her truth to the Galactic Council, everything changed. The room had gone silent as the weight of her words settled over the chamber like a cloak, suffocating the arrogance of the ruling species that had dominated the galaxy for eons. For the first time in their lives, they had seen a human, one who had not come to beg or to negotiate, but to show them the unmistakable force of purpose and unity that humanity now embodied. They were not prepared for this. The old power structures, the alliances forged in secret, the treaties signed in the dark, the unspoken rules that had governed the galaxy for millennia, were beginning to crack. Humanity's influence was like a rising tide, gentle at first, but unstoppable as it swelled, tearing at the very foundation of the old order. No longer would the galaxy be governed by the whims of a few elite species. The collective future of all species was on the table, and humanity was demanding a place at the head of the table. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a plea. It was a declaration. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity, with diplomatic channels opening across the galaxy in ways that had never been seen before. Humanity was no longer playing by the same rules as the Council. We were rewriting the very playbook. The former seat of galactic power, the once imposing Galactic Council, began to lose its grip on the galaxy's political direction, with once loyal members questioning the validity of their continued allegiance to the established order. From the outer reaches of space to the heart of the galaxy, humanity's rise was felt like an electric pulse. Every species that had once overlooked humanity now looked upon us with a mix of fear and awe. They had never expected the humans to play this game with such ambition, such resolve. They had assumed we were content to remain a secondary force, a species whose influence could easily be ignored. But in their assumptions, they had miscalculated. The first significant blow to the old order came in the form of a trade agreement, a seemingly innocuous document on the surface, but one that would prove to be a watershed moment in the history of intergalactic diplomacy. For years, the trade routes that connected the galaxy's various sectors had been tightly controlled by a coalition of the most powerful species. They dictated the terms of commerce, deciding which species could trade, what goods could be exchanged, and at what price. But humanity, in a bold move, brokered a new trade agreement that disrupted the status quo. It wasn't just about goods. It was about influence. Humanity's growing presence on these trade routes meant that we were now a crucial player in the economy of the galaxy. No longer could the old powers dictate terms without accounting for humanity's role. The Zoreth, once the undisputed masters of covert operations and espionage, found themselves unable to maintain control over their information networks. Humanity's encrypted communication systems, built with the precision of a species that understood both technology and strategy, proved unbreakable. The Zoreth's spies could no longer infiltrate our lines, and as their influence waned, their political leverage crumbled. Meanwhile, the Andromedes, who had long used their telepathic abilities to sway others to their side, found themselves facing a new challenge. Humanity had introduced a method of diplomacy that went beyond persuasion. It was about shared goals and mutual benefit. The Andromedes had always relied on their abilities to manipulate thoughts, bending others to their will. But humanity's vision of the future could not be coerced. It was a vision of cooperation, one that inspired rather than manipulated. As the Andromedes realized, their ability to control others through their psychic influence was no longer enough to tip the balance in their favor. But perhaps the most significant shift came in the Vrin, a species known for their technological superiority. The Vrin had long been the galaxy's undisputed experts in weapons development, their fleet unmatched in firepower. However, humanity's innovations, born not just of military necessity, but of necessity for survival and growth, began to rival the Vrin's technological edge. Our advanced propulsion systems, stealth technology, and new forms of energy generation forced the Vrin to acknowledge that their once unassailable technological dominance was no longer absolute. And as humanity's technological prowess grew, so did our reputation as a species that was capable of transforming the galaxy, not just with firepower, but with ingenuity. But it wasn't just in the political and economic spheres where humanity began to make its mark. There was a more profound shift taking place. Humanity, with all of its flaws and its history of conflict, had become a beacon of something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that was united in purpose, in vision, and in hope for the future. In the years leading up to humanity's rise, the galaxy had been divided, not just in terms of political power, but ideologically. Species had been isolated in their narrow perspectives, trapped by old prejudices, fears, and misunderstandings. They believed they had everything figured out. The Zoreth feared extinction, the Andromedes feared losing their ability to manipulate, and the Vrin feared the eventual decline of their technology. But humanity, our strength came from our collective struggle. We had fought wars, but we had also learned from them. We had suffered, and we had survived. We understood the importance of unity, of growth, of empathy. And that understanding, unlike the technological advancements or military strategies of the other species, was something they could not replicate. This newfound unity among humans had forged an identity that was no longer tied to the past, but to the future. And it was this future that we were offering to the galaxy. Humanity was not the conqueror that the old powers had feared. We were the bringers of change. We were the ones who would rebuild, who would heal the wounds of the past, and who would guide the galaxy into an age of true cooperation. It was in the midst of this realization that the tipping point occurred. The Council, which had once seemed invincible, now began to fracture under the pressure. The representatives of various species, who had been unified in their disdain for humanity's rise, now found themselves divided. Some began to secretly seek alliances with humanity, seeing in our vision a chance for their own species to thrive in a new era. Others, however, resisted, clinging to the old ways, refusing to let go of their positions of power. It was clear that the old guard could not hold forever. Humanity's influence was no longer something they could ignore. But what truly set humanity apart was that we didn't need to force the galaxy to bend to our will. We simply offered them a new path, a path where we would all walk together. And as the cracks in the Galactic Council widened, the species of the galaxy began to realize that humanity's vision of unity, collaboration, and mutual growth was not a threat. It was the future. As I looked across the galaxy, I could see the change taking root. The tides were turning. The old order was unraveling. The future was no longer a matter of which species could dominate the others. It was about which species could rise to the challenge of building something greater than themselves. Humanity had already shown the galaxy what we were capable of, and the turning tide of power was now unstoppable. The battle for galactic unity. The galaxy was on the precipice of a new era, but as with all moments of profound change, resistance was inevitable. Humanity had shown the galaxy its strength, its unwavering unity, its vision of a better future, but not all species were ready to embrace this transformation. Some clung desperately to the old order, to the established hierarchy that had served them for millennia. And those species, the ones who still believed they held the power to shake the galaxy, were now preparing to fight. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that humanity's strength was not in military might or ancient weaponry. Humanity's power was in its ability to adapt, to evolve, to unite in the face of adversity. We had fought wars in our past, but we had learned from them. We had overcome our divisions, and we were now united under a single banner, the future. The first signs of open resistance came in the form of a series of aggressive moves by the last remnants of the Galactic Council's old guard. The Zorath, once the shadowy rulers of espionage and covert operations, began to launch a campaign of misinformation. They spread rumors, planted spies, and tried to undermine humanity's growing influence in every corner of the galaxy. The Andromedes, ever the masters of manipulation, began using their telepathic abilities to sway public opinion in their favor, hoping to divide the newly forming alliances that had begun to coalesce around humanity's vision. And the Vryn, desperate to preserve their technological dominance, began amassing their fleet, preparing for a war they believed they could win. But humanity was ready. For years, we had been preparing for this moment, not just in terms of military power, but in understanding the true nature of warfare in this new age. It wasn't about brute force. It was about strategy, ingenuity, and the power of collective will. We had become the architects of our own future, building alliances, forging bonds, and preparing ourselves for the challenge that lay ahead. The first battle was not fought in space. It wasn't fought with lasers or missiles. It was fought in the hearts and minds of the galaxy's inhabitants. The resistance, sensing humanity's rising power, tried to ignite fear. Fear that a new order would strip them of their influence, their resources, their autonomy. But humanity's message, one of cooperation and mutual growth, had already begun to resonate across the stars. Species that had once been at odds, species that had fought countless wars and pulled together, now saw a different path forward. A path that wasn't about conquest or dominance, but about unity. The Zorath, whose web of spies had once been omnipresent, found themselves unable to control the flow of information. Humanity had developed a new form of communication, one that was decentralized, encrypted, and immune to interference. No longer could the Zorath's clandestine operations go undetected. Their influence began to wane, their schemes unraveled by the very technology they had once relied on to dominate. Meanwhile, the Andromedes, once masters of persuasion, were now facing a shift they had never anticipated. Humanity's diplomatic corps, led by figures like Captain Takara, proved to be far more resilient than the Andromedes could have imagined. Their telepathic abilities, while powerful, were now met with an unwavering will, a will that could not be swayed by simple mental manipulation. Humanity's message of hope, unity, and mutual progress had won the hearts of the galaxy's people, and no amount of mental trickery could erase that. The Vrin, for all their technological prowess, were now finding themselves outclassed in ways they could not have predicted. Humanity's technological innovations, born not out of the pursuit of dominance, but of necessity, began to outpace the Vrin's once infallible designs. We had unlocked new energy sources that the galaxy had never seen, created propulsion systems that far surpassed anything the Vrin had ever built. Our fleets, once considered primitive, now held the potential to challenge even the mightiest of the Vrin's warships. But the real turning point came when the galaxy's species, tired of the endless conflict and infighting, began to recognize the truth in humanity's vision. A new alliance began to form, a coalition of species that had once been divided by old rivalries, but now stood together in the face of the looming threat of war. Humanity was no longer the outsider, the underdog. We were the leaders of this new coalition, guiding the galaxy toward a future where cooperation would trump division, where mutual growth would take precedence over conquest. The battle for galactic unity was not fought with weapons of mass destruction. It was fought with diplomacy, with innovation, and with the will to bring about a lasting change. The forces of resistance, realizing that they could not win this battle through conventional means, began to fall apart. The Zorath's spies were no longer effective in sowing discord. The Andromedes' telepathic manipulations lost their hold over the minds of those who had seen humanity's vision. And the Vrin, who had once considered themselves the galaxy's technological overlords, now found themselves irrelevant in the face of humanity's rapid advancements. The resistance fractured, and the galaxy's future began to shift in ways that no one could have predicted. Humanity's influence spread even further as more and more species joined our cause, recognizing that the only way forward was through cooperation. The Galactic Council, which had once been the supreme body of power in the galaxy, began to lose its grip. No longer were the decisions of a few species able to dictate the fate of the entire galaxy. Now, it was the collective voice of many species, guided by humanity's principles of equality and mutual growth, that would chart the course for the future. But the fight was far from over. The remnants of the resistance, though scattered, were still dangerous. They would not give up easily. The battle for galactic unity was not just a matter of political power. It was a battle of ideals. Humanity had shown that it was possible to rise above old grudges, to build a future where no species ruled over another. But some would not accept this. They would continue to fight for the old ways, for the illusion of power that they had held for so long. As the final remnants of the resistance began to organize for one last desperate attempt to seize control, humanity knew that we had come too far to turn back now. The vision we had fought for, an era of peace, of cooperation, of shared growth, was within our grasp, but it would require one final push. The final battle, the one that would determine the future of the galaxy, was approaching. It was not a battle of destruction, but a battle for the heart and soul of the galaxy itself, and humanity was ready. The Galactic Reformation. The galactic landscape had changed irrevocably, and the old power structures that had once seemed unshakable were now little more than relics of a past era. Humanity had not merely asserted itself in the galaxy, it had led a profound reformation. What began as a quiet awakening had blossomed into a full-scale revolution in the way the galaxy viewed itself, and now the tides of change were irreversible. But this reformation was not born out of violence or conquest. It was a transformation of ideals, a change in how every species saw their future and their role within the galaxy. For centuries, the Galactic Council had stood as the final authority, a body made up of the galaxy's most powerful species, whose rules were dictated by power and the need to maintain control over the less influential. The council had operated under the assumption that their way of life was unchallengeable. It was a government by the few, for the few. But humanity had shown the galaxy that the true strength of a species lay not in its military might or ancient traditions, but in its ability to adapt, unite, and envision a future that was better for all. The days following the collapse of the old guard were filled with frantic negotiation, but also a deep sense of anticipation. The species that had once viewed humanity as weak now began to recognize the benefits of the change we had advocated for. The shift from dominance to cooperation was a difficult one for many. There were those who resisted the idea of sharing power, who feared losing their privilege. Yet there were also those who had long grown weary of the endless cycles of conflict and oppression. It was these species, the ones who had seen the devastation of the old ways, who were ready to embrace the future humanity had promised. The reformation did not happen overnight. It required constant work, constant dialogue, and most importantly, the willingness to listen. Humanity was not a species that imposed its will through force alone. No, humanity's strength was in our ability to foster understanding. We had learned, through centuries of internal conflict, how to forge peace out of chaos. We had learned that the key to true power was not in the ability to conquer, but in the ability to reconcile. One of the first major steps in this galactic reformation was the creation of the new Galactic Alliance, a council that replaced the old one that was based not on power or military strength, but on shared goals and mutual respect. The new Galactic Alliance was founded upon principles that humanity had always held dear: equality, cooperation, and the recognition that no one species could shape the future alone. It was not just a political structure. It was a new way of thinking, a new way of living. For the first time in history, the galaxy was governed by the voices of many, not just the few. And humanity, once relegated to the sidelines, now found itself at the heart of this new alliance, not as a conqueror, but as a leader. The core of the new Galactic Alliance was built on 4 foundational pillars: peace, prosperity, unity, and mutual growth. These principles were not just theoretical ideals. They were to be actively pursued in every decision, every action, and every policy enacted by the Alliance. For the first time, the galaxy's future was guided by a true collective vision, where no species was considered expendable and no voice went unheard. Humanity's role in this new order was not one of dominance, but of facilitation. We had learned that true power came from the ability to bring disparate voices together, to find common ground in the midst of conflict, and to help shape a future that benefited all. We were the mediators, the ones who could bridge the divides between species that had once been bitter enemies, and it was this ability to unite that allowed humanity to shape the direction of the new Galactic Alliance. The first test of this new alliance came when an old power, one that had long been resistant to the reforms humanity had proposed, attempted to overthrow the newly established government. The Xantari, a once feared race of warlords, had long ruled over their territory with an iron fist. They had resisted the idea of equality, believing that their superiority justified their domination over others. When they saw the new Galactic Alliance beginning to take shape, they knew their time of influence was coming to an end. They launched an assault on one of the key colonies that had joined the new alliance, hoping to spark a rebellion and undermine the fragile coalition humanity had worked so hard to build. But humanity was ready. The colonies that had pledged allegiance to the new Galactic Alliance stood united in the face of this aggression. There was no hesitation, no division. We had learned to fight together, not just with weapons, but with the strength of our shared vision. The battle was not long, but it was a defining moment. Humanity, along with our newfound allies, repelled the Xantari assault, not through overwhelming military might, but through the sheer force of unity. And in the wake of the battle, the Xantari were forced to accept the reality that the old ways were no longer viable. The galaxy would not be ruled by fear and violence. It would be shaped by cooperation and mutual respect. The aftermath of the battle was just as important as the battle itself. Humanity did not seek to humiliate or destroy the Xantari. Instead, we offered them a seat at the table, a chance to join the new Galactic Alliance and embrace the vision of a united galaxy. The Xantari, begrudgingly at first, accepted. And slowly, they began to realize that their power did not have to come from domination. They could be part of something greater, a future that was not based on fear, but on hope. The success of this first major test of the new Galactic Alliance sent ripples throughout the galaxy. Species that had once stood on the sidelines, unsure of where they fit in this new order, now saw that the vision humanity had laid out was not a utopian dream. It was a tangible, achievable future. The old Galactic Council, once a symbol of unchallenged authority, was now a shadow of the past. Its legacy of division and dominance was replaced by a new era. An era where the galaxy's species could work together to overcome challenges, solve problems, and build a future where everyone had a voice. But the work of the Galactic Reformation was far from over. There were still those who clung to the old ways, who sought to maintain their grip on power. And while the new Galactic Alliance was founded on principles of equality and cooperation, it would be tested time and time again. But humanity, having already proven its strength and resilience, would lead the way. The galaxy's future was no longer determined by those who held the most power. It was determined by those who were willing to work together for the greater good. The road ahead would not be easy, but with each passing day, humanity's role as the catalyst for this great reformation grew more undeniable. And with each species that joined the new Galactic Alliance, the vision of a united galaxy became more and more real. Humanity had not only unleashed its true power, we had unlocked the galaxy's future. A new dawn for the galaxy. The galaxy had, in many ways, never been the same. It had been shaped by centuries of conflict, power struggles, and domination. Species vying for control, entire civilizations crumbling under the weight of their own ambition. Yet, amidst the ruins of these broken systems, a new hope had emerged. A hope built on cooperation, unity, and the recognition that no one species could shape the future alone. Humanity had not only survived the galaxy's tumultuous history, it had transformed it. The day the Galactic Reformation became official was not a day of celebration. It was not a day marked by grand parades or loud fanfare. It was a day of quiet reflection. A day when every species in the galaxy paused to consider the magnitude of the shift that had just occurred. The old ways of rule, of power, of control had been dismantled, not by force, but by the very principles that had always driven humanity: unity, equality, and the belief that the future could be better than the past. The new Galactic Alliance was no longer a fragile coalition held together by political necessity. It had become a true embodiment of the future, a future where the strength of each species was celebrated, where the knowledge and resources of the galaxy's diverse peoples could be shared and built upon. Humanity had set the tone for this transformation, but it was the collective will of the galaxy that made it possible. The species that had once been divided by centuries of war and mistrust now stood united in a shared vision. But with this unity came a new set of challenges. The galaxy had never known true peace. The scars of the old conflicts ran deep. There were still species, albeit fewer and fewer, that clung to the old ways, factions that sought to disrupt the harmony that humanity and its allies had worked so hard to build. Yet this time, humanity did not stand alone. We were no longer an isolated force, struggling to make a name for ourselves. We were the architects of the galaxy's future, and our allies, once hesitant and fragmented, had become our partners in shaping that future. The first test of the new Galactic Alliance came soon after the Reformation was complete. A splinter faction of the Vrin, who had never fully accepted the changes that humanity had pushed for, attempted to take control of the energy resources of the Outer Rim. For them, the old ways of power and control were all they knew. They believed that the future of the galaxy should be shaped by those who had always held the power, not by a coalition of equals. Their motives were clear: to sow discord, to reignite old rivalries, and to seize control of the galaxy's most valuable resources. But humanity, along with the species who had embraced the Reformation, was ready. This time, there was no need for open warfare, no need for destruction. The lesson humanity had learned was that true power did not come from domination. It came from collaboration. The new Galactic Alliance had developed a new form of defense, one that did not rely on overwhelming force, but on the strength of unity. The Vrin's splinter faction's attempt to seize control was thwarted, not through battles of firepower, but through strategic diplomacy, economic pressure, and the collective will of the galaxy's people. What followed was a demonstration of the New Order's true power, not in fighting, but in building. With the Vrin faction now peacefully integrated into the new Galactic Alliance, the galaxy's first true interspecies infrastructure projects were launched. Energy grids were shared, communication networks were established that connected even the most remote corners of the galaxy, and trade routes that had once been controlled by a few species were now open to all. Species that had once been isolated and ignored began to thrive. The galaxy's wealth was no longer hoarded by the few. It was distributed equitably, ensuring that every species, no matter how small or insignificant it had once seemed, could contribute to the future. The next phase of the Reformation involved the exploration of the stars, not just for the expansion of power, but for knowledge, for discovery. Humanity had always been a species driven by curiosity, by the desire to understand the unknown. And now, this thirst for knowledge was shared by all. The new Galactic Alliance established an interstellar council focused on peaceful exploration, sending out expeditions to the furthest reaches of the galaxy. It was not an empire expanding its borders, but a collective effort to understand the mysteries of the universe. This new era also brought a renewed focus on science and innovation. The galaxy, which had once been torn apart by competition and warfare, was now united in its quest for progress. Humanity's early steps into space had been driven by a desire for survival, for dominance. But now, our reach extended beyond the stars for something much greater. The pursuit of knowledge, the drive to better understand the fabric of the universe. We sought not to conquer, but to discover. The galaxy's greatest minds, once isolated by species barriers and distrust, now collaborated freely, sharing their ideas and visions for the future. The ripple effects of this galactic transformation were felt in ways that no one could have predicted. Species that had once been at the heart of the galaxy's power, such as the Andromedes and the Zoreth, found themselves working alongside species that had once been regarded as weak or insignificant. The divide between the powerful and the powerless had begun to fade, replaced by a new understanding that the true strength of the galaxy lay not in dominance, but in its diversity. The galaxy's greatest assets were no longer its fleets or its weapons. It was the wealth of knowledge and experience that each species brought to the table. And as the galaxy entered this new age, a new generation was born. A generation of beings who had never known the old ways of war, of division, of oppression. These young beings, human and alien alike, grew up in a galaxy where cooperation was the norm, where the future was shaped not by the past, but by the collective will of all species. They were the children of the new Galactic Alliance, and they looked to the stars not with fear or suspicion, but with hope and curiosity. Humanity's role in this new order was not that of a ruler or conqueror, but as the leader of an era of change. We had shown the galaxy the power of unity, the strength of cooperation, and the boundless possibilities of a future where every species could thrive together. The new Galactic Alliance was no longer just a political body. It had become a living testament to what the galaxy could achieve when its people chose collaboration over conflict. The road had not been easy. It had been fraught with challenges, with setbacks, with battles fought and won, both in space and in the hearts and minds of the galaxy's people. But humanity had emerged as the force that guided the galaxy into this new age, not by force, but by the power of its vision for a better future. The galaxy, once torn apart by division and strife, was now united in its shared journey toward a brighter tomorrow. And as humanity stood at the forefront of this new era, we knew one thing for certain. The galaxy's future was no longer written in the stars alone. It was written in the hearts of every species that chose to walk this path together. Humanity had unleashed its true power, and the galaxy would never be the same.